The fluorescent lights in the Pentagon's secure conference room hummed softly as Admiral Marcus Hayes sat at the polished mahogany table, his weathered hands folded calmly in front of him. The 58-year-old veteran had seen 3 decades of naval service, from the Persian Gulf to the waters off Somalia, but today felt different. The weight of the accusations hanging over him pressed down like the deep ocean currents he'd once navigated. Across from him sat Colonel James Morrison, a stern-faced military prosecutor whose reputation for ruthlessness was well known throughout the Defense Department. Morrison's pale blue eyes never left Hayes as he shuffled through a thick folder of documents, each page representing another piece of what he believed was an ironclad case against the Admiral. "Admiral Hayes," Morrison began, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The charges against you are serious. Insubordination, unauthorized military operations, and endangering American personnel. The evidence is overwhelming." Hayes remained silent, his gray eyes steady and unflinching. He'd built his career on making tough decisions in impossible situations, and he wasn't about to start explaining himself to a desk jockey who'd never seen real combat. The medals on his chest told a story of bravery and sacrifice that Morrison's law degree could never match. The conference room was sterile and cold, designed to intimidate. Security cameras mounted in every corner recorded every word, every gesture. This wasn't just a military tribunal. It was theater, designed to send a message to anyone else who might think about challenging the chain of command. Morrison continued his opening statement, detailing how Hayes had allegedly authorized a rescue mission in Syria without proper clearance. The operation, codenamed Fallen Angel, was supposed to extract 3 captured CIA operatives from a terrorist stronghold near Aleppo. According to the official report, Hayes had acted outside his authority, risking an international incident and the lives of American soldiers. But Hayes knew the truth was far more complex. The CIA operatives weren't just intelligence officers. They were carrying information about a planned terrorist attack on American soil. Every hour of delay meant more innocent lives at risk. The bureaucratic red tape that Morrison was so fond of would have meant certain death for those men and potentially thousands of American civilians. As Morrison droned on about military protocol and proper channels, Hayes's mind drifted to the faces of the SEALs he'd sent on that mission. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, a brilliant tactical officer who could speak 4 languages fluently. Petty Officer Miguel Santos, whose steady hands had defused more bombs than anyone in the Navy. Chief Warrant Officer David Kim, whose sniper skills were legendary among Special Operations Forces. These weren't just names in a file to Hayes. They were his people, soldiers he'd trained and trusted with impossible missions. They'd volunteered for Fallen Angel without hesitation, knowing the risks and understanding the stakes. Morrison's sanitized version of events couldn't capture the reality of split-second decisions made under fire. Where hesitation meant death and bureaucracy was a luxury they couldn't afford. The prosecution's presentation continued with satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and witness testimony from other officers who questioned Hayes's judgment. Morrison painted a picture of a rogue admiral who'd lost sight of proper military procedure, driven by ego and a cowboy mentality that belonged in Hollywood movies, not real military operations. Hayes listened impassively as his career was dissected and criticized. 30 years of distinguished service reduced to a few controversial decisions made under extreme pressure. The Bronze Star, Silver Star, and Distinguished Service Medal on his uniform seemed insignificant against the weight of Morrison's accusations. The room filled with tension as Morrison described the aftermath of Operation Fallen Angel, how diplomatic relations with Syria had been strained, how other military operations had been compromised, how Hayes's actions had created ripple effects throughout the Middle East. Each point was delivered with prosecutorial precision, designed to show that Hayes's decision had been not just wrong, but catastrophically dangerous. But what Morrison didn't mention What the classified reports buried deep in Pentagon files would never reveal was the intelligence those rescued CIA operatives had carried. Information about a terrorist cell planning to detonate a dirty bomb in downtown Chicago during the 4th of July celebrations. Intelligence that had led to the quiet arrest of 15 terror suspects and prevented what could have been the worst attack on American soil since 9/11. Hayes had made his choice knowing it might end his career. Some decisions transcended personal consequences, and protecting American lives was always worth the risk. The men and women under his command understood this philosophy. It's what separated real warriors from parade ground soldiers. As the morning session wore on, Morrison introduced evidence of Hayes's pattern of irregular behavior. Previous missions where the Admiral had bent rules or ignored protocol in pursuit of mission success. Each incident was presented as proof of increasing recklessness, building toward the inevitable conclusion that Hayes could no longer be trusted with command. The Admiral's defense attorney, a sharp young Navy lawyer named Lieutenant Sarah Walsh, occasionally objected to Morrison's characterizations, but the damage was being done. In the clinical environment of the tribunal, Hayes's bold decisions looked like reckless endangerment. His innovative tactics seemed like dangerous improvisation. During the lunch break, Hayes stood by the window overlooking the Potomac River, watching the gray waters flow steadily toward the Chesapeake Bay. In a few hours, he might be stripped of rank and facing court-martial. His pension, his reputation, his legacy, everything could disappear because he'd chosen to save lives rather than follow proper channels. Lieutenant Walsh approached him with updates from the defense team. Character witnesses were lined up, former subordinates ready to testify about Hayes's leadership and judgment. But they both knew the political climate was wrong for a controversial acquittal. The Pentagon wanted someone to blame for the diplomatic tensions with Syria, and Hayes made a convenient scapegoat. "Admiral," Walsh said quietly, "there's still time to consider a plea agreement, reduced charges, early retirement with partial benefits. Morrison's office has indicated they might be willing to negotiate." Hayes shook his head firmly. "Lieutenant, I didn't spend 30 years in the Navy to compromise my principles now. If they want to crucify me for saving American lives, so be it. But I won't apologize for doing what was necessary." The afternoon session began with testimony from Pentagon officials who questioned Hayes's judgment. Desk-bound officers who'd never heard gunfire except on training ranges criticized his tactical decisions. Intelligence analysts who worked from air-conditioned offices second-guessed choices made in the heat of combat. Morrison orchestrated the testimony like a conductor leading a symphony of condemnation. Each witness added another layer to the prosecution's narrative. Hayes as a dangerous maverick who'd outlived his usefulness, a relic of an earlier military era when individual commanders had too much autonomy. The Admiral sat through it all with military bearing, his expression never revealing the frustration building inside him. These people had no understanding of what leadership meant in life-and-death situations. They confused following orders with moral courage, mistook bureaucratic compliance for military virtue. As the day wore on, the weight of the proceedings began to show on Hayes's face. Lines of stress appeared around his eyes, and his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible burden. This wasn't just about his career anymore, it was about the future of military leadership, about whether commanders would be allowed to make tough decisions without fear of political retribution. The tribunal adjourned for the day with Morrison confident in his position and Walsh scrambling to find holes in the prosecution's case. Hayes returned to his temporary quarters at Bolling Air Force Base, where he spent the evening reviewing classified files and preparing for what might be his final testimony as a United States Navy admiral. Outside his window, aircraft took off and landed in the distance, carrying on the business of national defense while his own future hung in the balance. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more accusations, and potentially the end of a distinguished military career. But Hayes had no regrets about the decisions that brought him to this point. Sometimes doing the right thing meant accepting the consequences, no matter how severe. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not just Hayes's fate, but the very nature of military leadership in the modern era. Forces were already in motion that would soon turn this quiet tribunal into something far more dramatic and revealing than anyone in that sterile conference room could imagine. The second day of the tribunal began with an unexpected development that sent ripples of tension throughout the Pentagon's corridors. Admiral Hayes arrived at the conference room to find additional security personnel stationed outside, their presence suggesting that something significant had changed overnight. Colonel Morrison appeared more animated than usual, his earlier confidence now mixed with an undercurrent of urgency. He carried a red folder marked with the highest classification levels, the kind of documents that could alter the course of military careers or international relations with a single revelation. "Admiral Hayes," Morrison announced as the session began, "new evidence has come to light regarding Operation Fallen Angel, evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of these proceedings." Hayes felt a chill run down his spine, but his expression remained impassive. In his experience, prosecutors who claimed to have new evidence usually meant they'd found something to twist existing facts into a more damaging narrative. Morrison opened the classified folder with theatrical precision. "Yesterday, we discussed your unauthorized rescue mission in Syria. Today we'll examine what you didn't rescue, and more importantly, what you may have inadvertently compromised." The prosecutor activated a secure presentation system, and classified satellite imagery filled the wall-mounted screens. The images showed the terrorist compound before, during, and after the SEAL team's extraction operation. Morrison used a laser pointer to highlight specific areas of the complex. "These images reveal something troubling, Admiral. Your rescue operation wasn't just unauthorized, it was also incomplete. While your team successfully extracted the 3 CIA operatives, they left behind a high-value target who was being held in a separate section of the compound." Hayes leaned forward slightly, his first sign of genuine concern. Morrison's information was partially correct, but the full context was still classified at levels that even this tribunal wasn't cleared to access. Morrison continued, his voice gaining momentum. "The individual your team failed to extract was Dr. Elena Kozlov, a Russian nuclear physicist who had been attempting to defect to the United States. She possessed critical information about weapons-grade uranium that had gone missing from former Soviet facilities." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Morrison had skillfully reframed Hayes' rescue mission as a catastrophic intelligence failure, but Hayes knew details that Morrison couldn't access. Dr. Kozlov hadn't been a defector at all, but a double agent whose extraction would have compromised an ongoing CIA operation to track weapons smuggling networks. Furthermore, Morrison pressed on, intercepted communications suggest that Dr. Kozlov was executed by her captors within hours of your team's departure. Her death and the loss of her intelligence can be directly attributed to your decision to prioritize the rescue of 3 CIA operatives over a potentially more valuable asset. Lieutenant Walsh immediately objected, arguing that Morrison was introducing classified information without proper vetting, but the damage was being done. The narrative had shifted from Hayes as a rule-breaking hero to Hayes as a commander whose poor judgment had cost lives and national security intelligence. Hayes requested permission to respond to these new allegations, but Morrison objected on grounds that the Admiral's security clearance for certain aspects of Middle Eastern operations had been suspended pending the outcome of the tribunal. It was a bureaucratic trap. Hayes couldn't defend himself without access to the classified details that would expose Morrison's distorted version of events. The morning session continued with testimony from intelligence analysts who painted a picture of devastating consequences from Operation Fallen Angel. They spoke of missed opportunities, compromised assets, and intelligence networks that had been burned because of Hayes's decision. Each witness added weight to Morrison's new narrative of catastrophic failure disguised as heroism. During the lunch break, Hayes made a decision that would change everything. He contacted his old friend, Admiral Robert Sterling, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Sterling was one of the few people in Washington with the security clearance and political position to access the complete files on Operation Fallen Angel. "Bob," Hayes said over a secure phone line, "I need you to review the complete Fallen Angel package, not just the CIA summary, but the NSA intercepts and the classified after-action reports. Morrison is painting a picture that isn't complete, and I can't defend myself without violating security protocols." Sterling's response was measured but supportive. "Marcus, you know I can't interfere with an ongoing tribunal, but I can ensure that all relevant evidence is properly presented to the panel." What Hayes didn't know was that Sterling had already been reviewing the complete Fallen Angel files. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs had grown increasingly concerned about the political motivations behind Hayes's prosecution and had quietly ordered his own investigation into the operation's true objectives and outcomes. The afternoon session took an even more dramatic turn when Morrison introduced his star witness, Captain Elizabeth Reed, the CIA liaison who had originally briefed Hayes about the captured operatives in Syria. Reed was a career intelligence officer whose testimony would carry significant weight with the tribunal panel. "Captain Reed," Morrison began, "please describe your interactions with Admiral Hayes regarding the Syrian situation." Reed's testimony was devastating to Hayes's position. She described how she had specifically briefed the admiral about the presence of multiple high-value targets at the compound, including Dr. Kozlov. According to Reed, Hayes had made the unilateral decision to focus only on extracting the CIA operatives, despite being informed about the strategic importance of the Russian scientist. But as Reed continued her testimony, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge. Her description of the intelligence briefing didn't match the timeline of events that Hayes remembered, and her characterization of the Syrian compound's layout differed from the satellite imagery that Morrison had presented earlier. Lieutenant Walsh picked up on these discrepancies during cross-examination. "Captain Reed, you testified that you briefed Admiral Hayes about Dr. Kozlov's presence at the compound. Can you specify the date and time of this briefing?" Reed hesitated slightly before providing a date that would have been impossible given Hayes's travel schedule and operational commitments. Walsh pressed further, exposing gaps in Reed's testimony that suggested she might not have been as directly involved in the operation as Morrison claimed. As the afternoon wore on, it became clear that something wasn't right about the prosecution's case. The new evidence felt manufactured, and key witnesses seemed to have rehearsed their testimony too carefully. Hayes began to suspect that forces beyond the tribunal were working to ensure his conviction. During a brief recess, Hayes noticed increased security activity in the hallways outside the conference room. Military police officers were conducting what appeared to be unscheduled security sweeps, and several high-ranking officials from the Joint Chiefs of Staff had arrived at the Pentagon for unannounced meetings. When the session resumed, Morrison made his most dramatic move yet. He announced that he was recommending immediate suspension of Hayes's security clearance and detention pending further investigation into potential treason charges. The accusation sent shockwaves through the room. Treason was a capital offense that could result in life imprisonment or even execution. "Admiral Hayes," Morrison declared, "your actions in Syria appear to have been more than just insubordination. The pattern of decisions you made, combined with the intelligence failures that resulted, suggest a level of negligence that borders on intentional misconduct." Hayes stood slowly, his face flushed with anger for the first time during the proceedings. "Colonel Morrison, I've sat through 2 days of character assassination and distorted facts. I've watched you twist a successful rescue mission into evidence of treason. But I won't sit here while you destroy the reputations of the brave men and women who carried out that operation." The tribunal chairman, General Patricia Hawkins, called for order, but Hayes continued. "The SEALs who executed Operation Fallen Angel risked their lives to save American operatives who possessed critical intelligence about terrorist threats to our homeland. They succeeded in their mission despite impossible odds and political second-guessing from people who've never faced enemy fire." Morrison objected vehemently, arguing that Hayes was attempting to influence the proceedings with emotional appeals rather than addressing the evidence. But Hayes's words had struck a chord with some members of the tribunal panel, particularly those with combat experience, who understood the realities of special operations. General Hawkins made a decision that would escalate the situation beyond anyone's control. "Admiral Hayes, given the serious nature of these new charges, I'm ordering that you be held in custody pending completion of these proceedings. Bailiffs, please escort the Admiral to secure detention." Two military police officers approached Hayes's table, but the Admiral remained seated. "General Hawkins, with respect, I believe this tribunal has exceeded its authority. I request permission to contact the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff before submitting to detention." "Admiral," Hawkins replied firmly, "you are no longer in a position to make requests. Officers, please escort Admiral Hayes from this room." The guards moved closer to Hayes, but he didn't budge. His jaw was set in determination, and his eyes held the steely resolve that had carried him through 3 decades of military service. This was his line in the sand. He would not be led away like a criminal for doing his duty as an officer and a patriot. "Gentlemen," Hayes said calmly to the approaching guards, "I understand you have your orders, but I'm asking you to consider what's really happening here. This tribunal is being manipulated by people who want to use me as a scapegoat for political failures in Syria." The guards hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Arresting a decorated admiral was not something they'd trained for, and Hayes's calm demeanor made their task more difficult. One of them, a young sergeant, looked uncertain about physically restraining a superior officer who wasn't resisting violently. Morrison grew impatient with the standoff. "General Hawkins, Admiral Hayes is clearly in contempt of this tribunal. I recommend immediate use of whatever force is necessary to ensure compliance with your order." The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited to see how the confrontation would resolve. Hayes remained seated, neither submitting to arrest nor actively resisting, creating a standoff that would require a decision from the tribunal leadership. Outside the conference room, events were already in motion that would soon change everything. Admiral Sterling had completed his review of the complete Operation Fallen Angel files, and what he'd discovered would expose the true motivations behind Hayes's prosecution. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs was about to make a decision that would send shockwaves throughout the Pentagon and potentially save Hayes's career. But first, the immediate crisis in the tribunal room had to be resolved. The standoff in the conference room stretched into uncomfortable minutes as Admiral Hayes remained seated while 2 guards waited for clearer instructions. General Hawkins was about to issue a direct order for physical removal when the secure communication system in the room began chiming with an urgent priority message. The tribunal secretary quickly approached the general and whispered something that made Hawkins's face go pale. Whatever message had just arrived carried enough authority to make a 3-star general reconsider her position. The room fell into an eerie silence as everyone sensed that the dynamic was about to shift dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Hawkins announced with visible tension, "this tribunal is temporarily suspended pending receipt of new classified materials that may be relevant to these proceedings." Colonel Morrison shot to his feet in protest. "General Hawkins, we have clear evidence of contempt and potential treason. Suspending these proceedings now sends the wrong message about military discipline and could—" His objection was cut short by the sound of the conference room's reinforced doors opening. The electronic locks had been overridden by someone with the highest level of security authorization. What happened next would be talked about in Pentagon corridors for years to come. 6 figures in navy dress blue uniforms entered the room with the precise, coordinated movement that marked them as elite special operations personnel. Their decorations told the story of America's most dangerous missions: silver stars, bronze stars with V devices for valor, purple hearts, and the distinctive seal trident that marked them as members of the Navy's most elite fighting force. Leading the group was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, her slight frame and calm demeanor masking the deadly skills that had made her legendary among Special Operations Forces. Behind her came Petty Officer Miguel Santos, whose steady hands and unflappable nature under fire had saved countless lives in hostile territory. Chief Warrant Officer David Kim followed, his sniper's precise movements evident even in dress uniform. The remaining 3 SEALs were equally impressive. Senior Chief Marcus Williams, whose expertise in underwater operations had revolutionized maritime special warfare. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, whose name made Colonel Morrison do a double-take as he realized this was his own son. And Chief Petty Officer Amanda Torres, whose intelligence analysis capabilities had prevented numerous terrorist attacks. The room fell completely silent as these 6 warriors positioned themselves between Admiral Hayes and the 2 guards who had been attempting to arrest him. Their presence transformed the sterile conference room into something that felt more like a battlefield, where loyalty and honor meant more than bureaucratic procedures. Lieutenant Commander Chen spoke first, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had led men and women through life-and-death situations. General Hawkins, we request permission to present evidence relevant to Admiral Hayes's case and the charges related to Operation Fallen Angel. Morrison found his voice, though it cracked slightly with stress. This is highly irregular. These personnel have no authority to interrupt a military tribunal. Colonel, Chief Williams interrupted, his voice carrying decades of experience in the most dangerous corners of the world. We're the personnel who executed Operation Fallen Angel. We think our testimony might be relevant to your case against our admiral. General Hawkins looked uncertain, clearly caught between competing pressures and protocols. Before she could respond, the conference room's secure communication system activated again, and the voice of Admiral Robert Sterling, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, filled the room through the speakers. General Hawkins, this is Admiral Sterling. I'm ordering an immediate halt to all proceedings against Admiral Hayes, pending review of newly classified materials that directly contradict the evidence presented by the prosecution. The announcement sent shockwaves through the room. Morrison's face went red with anger and frustration as he realized his carefully constructed case was being dismantled by forces beyond his control. Sterling's voice continued. The 6 SEAL personnel now present in your conference room are there on my direct orders to provide testimony that was previously classified beyond the tribunal's clearance level. Colonel Morrison's prosecution has forced my hand in declassifying materials that reveal the true scope and success of Operation Fallen Angel. Lieutenant Commander Chen stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the conference table. General Hawkins, what I'm about to present will show that Operation Fallen Angel was not only authorized at the highest levels, but was also one of the most successful counterterrorism operations in recent Navy history. The folder contained documents that Morrison had never seen, records from the National Security Council, direct communications between the President and military leadership, and intelligence assessments that painted a completely different picture of the Syrian operation. Admiral Hayes didn't act outside his authority, Chen explained, her words cutting through Morrison's objections like a blade through silk. He was executing a direct order from the National Security Council to prevent a terrorist attack on American soil that would have killed thousands of civilians. Petty Officer Santos stepped forward with additional documentation. The 3 CIA operatives we extracted weren't just gathering intelligence, they were the only people who knew the location of weapons-grade uranium that terrorists had acquired from black market sources. Every hour of delay meant that material could have been moved beyond our ability to track it. Chief Kim added his own evidence to the growing pile. Dr. Elena Kozlov, the Russian scientist that Colonel Morrison claims we abandoned, was never a defector. She was a double agent working for Russian intelligence, and her extraction would have compromised ongoing operations to track nuclear smuggling networks throughout Eastern Europe. The revelations continued as each SEAL presented evidence that systematically destroyed Morrison's case. The terrorist attack that Hayes had prevented wasn't theoretical. Intelligence agencies had intercepted specific plans to detonate a dirty bomb during 4th of July celebrations in Chicago. The CIA operatives' information had led to the arrest of an entire terrorist cell and the recovery of enough radioactive material to contaminate several city blocks. Lieutenant Morrison, the colonel's son, stepped forward with perhaps the most damaging evidence of all. "Dad," he said, looking directly at his father, "the intelligence briefings you used in this prosecution were altered to remove references to the NSC authorization and the domestic terrorism threat. Someone wanted Admiral Hayes to look like a rogue operator instead of a hero." Colonel Morrison's face went ashen as he realized the full scope of what had been hidden from him. His son's testimony revealed that the prosecution had been based on deliberately incomplete information, designed to create a case for treason where none existed. General Hawkins called for a recess to review the new evidence, but Admiral Sterling's voice came through the speakers again. "General, there will be no recess. What you've just heard represents the complete declassification of Operation Fallen Angel at the direct order of the President of the United States." The room buzzed with the implications of Sterling's statement. Presidential involvement meant that this tribunal had become a matter of national security, not just military discipline. Chief Torres presented the final piece of evidence, surveillance footage from the Syrian compound that showed Dr. Kozlov actively collaborating with her captors to set traps for any rescue attempt. Her execution after the SEAL team's departure had been planned regardless of whether she was extracted, making Morrison's accusations about Hayes causing her death completely baseless. "Admiral Hayes," Sterling's voice continued, "you are hereby reinstated to full duty with all privileges and security clearances restored. The charges against you are dismissed, and I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Service Cross for your leadership during Operation Fallen Angel." The 6 SEALs stood at attention as their admiral rose from his seat, his dignity intact despite the ordeal he'd endured. The guards who had been attempting to arrest him now stepped back respectfully, recognizing that they had been about to detain a genuine American hero. Morrison slumped in his chair, realizing that his career was likely over. He had been manipulated by intelligence agencies with their own agendas, used as a tool to destroy a good officer's reputation for reasons he was only now beginning to understand. "Colonel Morrison," Sterling's voice carried a note of sympathy, "you were provided with deliberately incomplete intelligence for this prosecution. While that doesn't excuse the zealousness of your pursuit, it does explain how you were led to make false accusations against one of our finest officers." Lieutenant Commander Chen addressed the tribunal panel directly. "General Hawkins, the 6 of us requested permission to testify because Admiral Hayes has never received proper recognition for saving American lives. While he was facing treason charges, the intelligence he helped secure was being used to prevent terrorist attacks from Paris to Tokyo." The revelations continued as each SEAL described specific operations that had been made possible by the intelligence gained from Operation Fallen Angel. Terrorist cells disrupted, weapons shipments intercepted, and attacks prevented, all because Admiral Hayes had made the tough decision to authorize an extraction mission when bureaucratic delays would have meant disaster. Senior Chief Williams spoke for all of them when he said, Admiral Hayes didn't just save 3 CIA operatives in Syria, he saved thousands of American lives, and he was willing to sacrifice his career to do it. That's the kind of leader we need in the Navy, not the kind we should be prosecuting. As the afternoon wore on, the full scope of the conspiracy against Hayes became clear. Foreign intelligence services had manipulated American bureaucracy to neutralize one of the Navy's most effective leaders. The altered intelligence briefings, the coached witnesses, even Captain Reed's false testimony, all of it had been orchestrated to remove Hayes from his position. General Hawkins formally dismissed all charges and issued a public apology to Admiral Hayes on behalf of the tribunal. But the damage to military morale and trust had already been done. Word of Hayes's vindication spread quickly throughout the Pentagon, but so did the knowledge that good officers could be destroyed by political manipulation and bureaucratic warfare. The 6 SEALs remained in the conference room as the other participants filed out. Their mission complete, but their vigilance unchanged. They had come to defend their admiral because loyalty and honor demanded it, and they had succeeded in exposing the truth that others had tried to bury. Admiral Hayes addressed his SEALs with the same calm authority that had carried them through dangerous missions around the world. Thank you for your courage today. What you did here required the same bravery as any battlefield, and I'm proud to have served with each of you. As they prepared to leave, Lieutenant Morrison approached his father with a mixture of sadness and determination. Dad, I hope you understand why I had to testify. Admiral Hayes saved lives, and he deserved better than this. Colonel Morrison nodded. Finally understanding the full scope of his son's loyalty and the principles that drove the Navy's elite warriors. Son, you did the right thing. I just wish I had seen the truth sooner. The conference room that had witnessed 2 days of false accusations and manufactured evidence now stood empty, except for the lingering sense that justice had been served. Admiral Hayes walked out with his head high, his career restored, and his reputation enhanced by the ordeal he had endured. Outside the Pentagon, American families went about their daily lives, unaware that they owed their safety to the quiet heroism of a Navy admiral and 6 SEALs who had risked everything to protect them. The true measure of their success wasn't the dismissal of charges or the restoration of rank. It was the terrorist attacks that never happened and the lives that were saved by their courage under fire. The silence that had fallen over the room when the SEALs entered would be remembered as the moment when truth triumphed over manipulation, when loyalty proved stronger than political expedience, and when 6 warriors reminded everyone present what military service really meant.